Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Tuesday, December 3rd informational meeting. We'll call the meeting to order, and we'll get started today with a staff report with Jim David. Welcome, Jim.
Good afternoon, councilors. Jim David, operations manager. At the end of each year, the City Council considers its legislative priorities, and a formal presentation is scheduled at the December 10th informational, and then final adoption will be scheduled for December 17th at the regular meeting. Each of you in front of you should have a provisional resolution that you approved in August, and I just ask that you review that between now and next week, and let me know if you have any changes, any additions, any subtractions, and then we'll do a formal presentation next week, and again, final consideration on December 17th. Happy to answer any of your questions.
Any questions from the council? Looks like we're good. Thanks, Jim. We had an audit committee meeting yesterday. We'll look for a report from that from Councilor Neitzert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have some meaty items on the agenda today, so I'm going to keep this brief. At the audit committee meeting yesterday, we had 3 items. The first was a proposed 2020 audit plan. Our audit manager presented a proposed plan, which was recommended for approval, with 2 additional suggestions from the audit committee. That proposed plan is going to be considered by the City Council at a meeting in the coming weeks. The second item was a presentation by Eide Bailey regarding the start of their 2019 external audit of the city. And the third item was a presentation of the audit of the landfill licensing process, and that audit will be presented to the full City Council at an informational meeting in the coming weeks as well. That's it. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. City Council open discussion, anybody? Councilor Kiley.
Thank you. Over the weekend, I sent everybody an email alerting you of a special meeting this Friday of Metro Communications Board, where we'll be discussing facility needs for Metro Communications. I would encourage you to attend if at all possible. That's 9 o'clock this Friday morning at the County Commission room.
Friday, 9 o'clock. Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Councilor Starr.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would like to share with the council and the rest of the city that this weekend, or starting tomorrow night at the Washington Pavilion, the Dakota Academy of Performing Arts, which is youth theater here in Sioux Falls, will be performing Frozen. And they have a cast of 73 young people between 8th grade, and I couldn't tell how small some of them were over the weekend. So, but it does star an incredible young lady who happens to have the same last name. So, so I would invite you. I believe most of the performances are completely sold out. They added an additional performance on Sunday night. So I believe they are doing 8 performances in the next 4.5 days. So.
Oh, wow.
It will be a great event, and it's my plug for the pavilion as well, of getting young people involved and people into the facility. So there are lots of families and a number of scholarships and different ways that people have paid, and a very diverse group of young people who are performing in this Frozen event. So, and I never want to hear "Let It Be" anymore. So I'm let it go, let it be.
Let it be. Let the
I'm
Beatles
done with
too.
it.
All right. Thank you. Anybody else? All right, we'll move in with our presentations for today. We'll start with the Events Campus Study Group Report. Director Eckhoff, welcome.
Good afternoon, Council. Jeff Eckhoff, Planning and Development Services. In January of this year, the mayor convened a study group for the Events Campus to look at the total utilization and future of that. And what is only could be an ironic twist, I was a co-chair at that time with Dan Stottema for the first 2 meetings, and then became a candidate for this position and withdrew from that committee. So it's kind of full circle today that the report is here. Dan Stottema is going to come up in a second and present the report to you. There are copies, I believe, in front of you and copies on the table for the group, and they'll be on the screen as well. And then after Dan gets done, I'll come back up and talk a little bit about, for the last 2 months, we've been working internally as a staff to take those recommendations and formulate them into the next steps. And I'll talk very briefly about that. But at this time, I'd like to present Dan Stottema, who was the chair and co-chair, along with Ryan Peaty, after my departure of the Events Campus Study Group. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Dan.
Good afternoon, councilors. Thanks for having me. I will say that your game.
State your name just for the record,
sorry.
please. Thank you.
Dan Sodoma, I was the co-chair of the Event Center Task Force. I will say that your gain with Mr. Eckhoff was our loss on this particular task force, but he's in a good position to help serve the city. This report has been out for a couple of months now. I'm assuming most of you have seen it, so I'm not going to go through it line by line, word by word, but we will go through the entire thing. And if you have any particular questions or things you'd like a little more information on, please feel free to stop me and we'll go from there. The scope of the conversation was fairly limited to just that particular campus. We looked at the 4 main facilities, being the Denny Sanford Premier Center, the arena, the convention center, and the baseball stadium. We really spent probably at least the first 3 months educating ourselves on all the facilities, a lot of nuances, listening to a lot of user groups. You can see some of these people here. We relied heavily on these additional resources. I would like to say thank you to the study group members who did donate a great deal amount of time and energy and effort to this process. They were very engaged. It was not a once a month sort of hour deal. It was several hours a week at a minimum throughout this process. We had good representation. We had bankers, we had attorney, builders, architects, a good cross-section of folks to give us a variety of opinions. And again, the additional resources were incredibly valuable to us as we went throughout the process. It's not a new topic, the campus. It's been studied many times, most recently before we decided to build the Premier Center. So it's something that's been around for a long time. Again, the scope of the work, we were a 14-person group, dwindled a little bit as we went, and we met about 6-7 times, roughly monthly. The mayor really challenged us to have a 20-year pair of goggles on when we were looking at the campus, not just think about next year or 5 years from now, but try to think long-term for the best fit for the campus and the growth of that area as a whole. Public input was important to us. We started with a survey that was online. We got over 1,200 completed responses, and we got a lot of insight from a lot of the community on what they thought or how engaged they had been in the campus in the past. You can see here that 96% of the folks that took it had attended an event somewhere on the campus, which means they had some familiarity with the area and some experience. And quite a few of them had been to many. For baseball, 52% had been to baseball within the last couple of years. We struggled with the baseball stadium as a whole, and it was difficult to compartmentalize the conversation of the campus. It was difficult to talk about the arena without talking about how that would affect the baseball stadium, talking about how that would affect the convention center space. So we really took a process of kind of dividing and learning about each one as a whole, and then bringing the whole conversation together and trying to talk to them together about all of them all at the same time. The arena, again, a lot of people have been there. This was one of the more shocking statistics to me. 70% said they had been to the arena. I wondered if the exact wording on that particular question, if some folks weren't confusing the arena with the Premier Center as far as attending an event there, but there are still a couple of events that take place at the arena. And then the convention center. We heard over and over again about how busy it is, how booked it is, and what a great asset it is to the community. Parking was something we thought would be probably a little more of a hot topic item when it came to the campus than we actually heard about. But 45% of the people in the survey said they thought it was good or excellent. 72% said they were open to using fast transit options to the end of the campus, and we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to the end and go through some of the recommendations. The arena, we did recommend that we tear down the arena. Between the annual loss in revenue to the community every year, just the outdatedness of the facility, the lack of use of the facility. It's primarily used at this point for additional flat floor space when we do have those convention centers that need a little more space. So we did come up with the recommendation that we tore down the arena. Again, I'm oversimplifying things because we spent many hours talking about it. We spent many hours looking at, can it be renovated? And if it can be renovated, how can it be renovated? Is it more flat floor space? Is it 2 floors of flat floor space? In the end, the numbers just didn't really make sense. And what did make the most sense was to just take that particular facility down. The convention center, we went through a lot of data primarily provided by Terry with Convention and Visitors Bureau. She, of course, would like to see a lot more than 60,000 additional square feet of flat floor space out there because of the use and the ability it gives them to help attract new conventions and more conventions to our community. We talked about it ad nauseum and thought that 60,000 square feet, which is roughly doubling the amount of flat floor space that's there now, was a good place to start. Baseball stadium, again, it is a net loser for the city right now when it comes to the finances. It's a facility that has served us well for a lot of years, but again, it's very old, it's very tired. We've made significant capital contributions into it in the past years just because of the life safety needs, things we needed to do just to keep it open and active. We had a great deal of conversation about the long-term feasibility of the stadium and is that the right location. In the end, the group decided that we are a baseball community. We do like baseball, but as of right now, for this particular campus, that ground was probably better suited for something other than a baseball stadium. When we were going through this process, we did come up with a bunch of other miscellaneous things that weren't necessarily related to one particular component of the campus. It's time to have a detailed study, I think, master plan of the campus as a whole. There's a lot of things that have changed since we built the Premier Center. That changes things like parking and access, the use of ride sharing, finding ways to make that as efficient and easy to use as possible on the campus. And depending on the community's desire to move forward or not move forward on some of these recommendations, you're going to have to look at things like parking and additional parking, and depending on how big of convention center space you build. Additional hotel rooms. The Sheraton is fairly busy. They do have some vacancy, but if we build more convention center space, one of the things that the CVB needs is more connected full-service hotel rooms to help attract those conventions to our town. We also heard that from the Sports Authority when they're trying to attract those events that want to use our facilities. They need small meeting rooms, they need big meeting rooms, they need lots of hotel rooms to help accommodate those events. Connectivity to the campus. There's a lot of areas of downtown that are of the community, especially downtown, that I think would benefit from it. We talked about the bus rapid transit, some type of connectivity, especially to downtown, that helps facilitate the energy of downtown to this particular campus. And we talked about other areas of the community as well, and if it is successful and we decide to do it, it might make sense to think about other portions of the community as we go forward, but felt like downtown was the most logical spot to start. As with most topics, things are changing in the community all the time. We're lucky to live in a community that has growth and change. There are obviously some other conversations going on about additional convention center space. And based on all the testimony we heard from not only the CVB, but all the other groups, the convention center space in town is really needed and will help the community as a whole attract more business. And adjacent land acquisition, it's clear that in the next 10 years, the next 20 years, the next 50 years, as that campus develops, we might need additional land as part of that campus. We didn't identify any specific parcels, but thought it would be wise for the city as a whole to keep an eye out for adjacent properties that do become available when and if they do become available, and consider purchasing them and adding them to the campus as we go. Green space, a new entrance. Happen to be a big fan of green space. One of the things I think the facility lacks right now is a really well-defined entrance. There are lots of little different entrances, and if you're new to our community and you don't really know which building is which, it's tough to figure out which one is the primary one. I think it's one of those things that can be addressed if we do some master planning on the campus and accommodate both. Any questions I can answer?
Thank you, Dan. Council, any questions? Councilor Erickson?
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Dan, and thanks for everyone that served on this committee. I know it's been studied many times. However, we need to keep making sure that our convention space is fresh and that we can accommodate those conventions that do come into our community. It is a huge economic driver, and so thanks for all the time with that. One of the questions that I do have, I'll start at the end. When you talked about adjacent land acquisition, I know this building was maybe not necessarily within your purview, but it's right next to the campus and the city owns it as far as the utility building.
Sure.
Utility billing building, and as far as making that more attractive, is that best suited to be storage? Is it best suited to be torn down? Is it best suited to be an RFP and turn it into a restaurant or fill in the blank? I don't know. And then also if you can address any conversations that took place with the Sioux Falls School District. There's always rumors that they're potentially moving out of that building. I don't know. I haven't talked to anyone that, I think people just like to speculate, but curious if there's any conversations with that.
Sure. For sure, there's always speculation and rumors going around, and if we sat down and tried to figure out each one that came across our plate through this process, it would have been never ending. We did talk to the school district. They didn't talk about any immediate plans to vacate any of that, nor did we, again, master plan any specific parcel adjacent to the campus. Rather went with a kind of a higher reaching, I think we should be mindful of adjacent properties that do become available. To your question about the other city property, we didn't have specific conversations about that parcel. But again, I think if we go through a well thought out master planning process for that campus and include some of those adjacent parcels that may or may not become available in the future, that will help us come up with a great spatial master plan for the whole campus.
Well, and if I can follow up, are the next steps a master plan to come in and say, hey, here's the recommendations of our citizens that came in and did this study. Is it the master plan that would then come back to the council? Because I think the devil's in the details as far as the dollars. When we start talking about tearing down the arena, which is extremely tired, and I don't think we're getting as much bang for our buck, so to speak, from that if we had a different facility. But at what cost are the citizens willing to reinvest in that? Because we're obviously talking about a pretty substantial bond that we would need to do. So is the next step master plan, or?
When I'm done, I'm going to let Jeff come up here and talk to you about what he thinks is the next step. But great questions, and you're right. This isn't the start of the conversation. This is the continuation of the conversation, and this report isn't the end of the conversation either.
Because I can't remember, I think it's Leisure Sports and something group that came in and did a study, and they included the CSL, yes, thank you. So they came in and did a study, included the baseball stadium, which, I don't know, I feel like just information was picked off the internet. It wasn't really I think they told us what we knew, and it wasn't really a master plan or really anything that we could move forward. This is, in my opinion, more meaningful information than we got the last time, and we paid several thousands of dollars for somebody to come in and tell us what we already knew. So I would be interested in those next steps, obviously from Director Eckhoff, but also just being super careful of how we're going to continue to include the public in this, because we're talking big bucks, and you know what makes sense, but how are we going to see that return of investment? The other thing that I would just throw out there, and again, I'm not picking on the baseball stadium, it's just, you know, as we've talked about repurposing that area, and they're in a contract. Can we get out of that contract or can we not? And so that's something that needs to be discussed too, because I don't think any of us like to continue to throw money at something that we're just barely squeaking by and subsidizing every single year. I mean, it's a cool building, but there's a lot of cool buildings.
We had a lot of conversation about timelines. We kind of tried to lay out some of the priorities, but it's thankfully on your plates to decide what we move forward with and when, and to help prioritize how that goes.
Thank you. I appreciate all your time.
Councilor Kiley?
Thank you. My understanding is the arena's been operating in the red since.
Based on the information we received, correct.
So it's hard to disagree with maybe moving on with another use for that space. But what consideration was given to the tenants of that building, like Augustana basketball, the Shrine Circus, some of our outdoor shows that utilize that building and may have a hard time moving over to the event center?
Sure. Quite a bit. And we had a lot of conversations about who are the primary user groups. Again, we got a lot of that information from SMG and some of the other resources that we had available to us. And I think you're right. I think the primary ones were kind of high school graduation ceremonies, Augustana, which now moved out to the Pentagon, and the Shrine. It was our understanding that these groups had been offered or had been offered alternate solutions, including places like the Premier Center. I don't know that everybody was 100% gung-ho on change, because sometimes change is hard, but everybody seemed pretty confident that there were realistic alternative locations for the few existing user groups that were using the arena.
Sure. Well, a lot of fond memories of events at the arena, but we do have to move on too and be fiscally responsible as well. And going back to the baseball stadium, I am in agreement that there is a better site. Hopefully, we can locate that to a better site in the city of Sioux Falls, especially considering some of your plans here with increasing parking, or maybe a hotel. You know, both of those could be achieved by removal of the arena, removal of the stadium, baseball stadium. And let's face it, that baseball stadium is only used maybe 2.5 to 3 months out of the year. And then it's sitting vacant the remainder. Could be utilized much more profitably. However, we do have a commitment with the contract, as Councilor Erickson stated. And I know that as tough as it is for some of my colleagues to put money into some of the necessary improvements and maintenance work there, it's important that we do that to continue to protect the public. I mean, after all, it could be our children that's attending a baseball game there, or our friends or other relatives, and we do have a responsibility to ensure that it's in safe operating condition. But I would encourage relocation of that, because you would like to see, I come from a baseball family, would like to see baseball stay in the city, but maybe at a different location, so I'm in support of that. The convention space, the additional 60,000 square feet, with the proposed convention and project that's just now was announced last week on the Sioux Steel property, how would you envision that impacting adding convention space to our existing space? Because let's face it, that's going to be in competition with our city convention facilities. And to add 60,000 square feet for maybe a once or twice a year opportunity, is it prudent use of taxpayer dollars?
It's a fair question, and probably one better suited answered by somebody like Terry, who can talk to you about the number of requests they get and the size of those particular requests, and what's the realistic opportunity that we would have at attaining them. I can tell you that through our conversations, the desire as a whole for more convention center space was very, very high. And so there's quite possibly opportunity for multiple locations or multiple buildings of convention centers.
And I mean, I've had many conversations with Terry, and I do know that we lose out on many events, but I was just wondering how that would actually pan out and how a new facility downtown may impact that as well too. So, thank you.
Before we take any more, do we have more to the presentation? Do we want to finish up and then do questions, or do we want to break this up? Director, do you? Okay. Anybody else have questions? Do you want yours or for Dan?
Yeah, I guess I do, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
So first of all, I have to say that I agree with you. I was frankly mystified by 70% of the respondents attended an event at the arena in the last 2 years. And I have to wonder if maybe people read into that, you know, like if I went to something that was a convention center and it bled over into the arena, that they counted that, because I just don't think there's that many events. But I could be wrong. So that one was a little puzzling. That's just a commentary. I loved what you said about green space, because I think we can make it far more attractive, walkable. It's kind of a vast wasteland of parking. It's very hostile, I think, to pedestrians, and I think increasing that experience would be wonderful. And there's a lot of concrete and not a lot of grass. So I think that's something that we should look at, but that would be, obviously we want to do that in tandem with probably an entire master plan, so we do it in one piece. As far as the stadium goes, and I did watch the meetings when I could, and I did attend a few. Was your recommendation that we essentially maintain for now while we wait for something else, and that could be some sort of a private entity? Is that, what was your vision of what we would do with the stadium in the short term?
I think part of that is up to you. I think, again, if you take the goggles on of, is there a baseball stadium there in 20 years? Our recommendation is no, there's probably not. Clearly, there are some variables at play here with existing contracts that need to play out and be decided, as well as making sure you're keeping up with those life safety things. But if there's an agreement that there probably isn't a baseball stadium in 20 years, it helps solidify your mind frame in, all right, we need to spend what we have to keep it safe and do the things that we have to, but maybe not any more than that for right now, because in 3 years, 2 years, 7 years, whatever that time frame is, we agree there might not be a baseball stadium there.
And from your group's vision, if your answer was, we don't see a stadium there in 20 years, why was that? Is it because you thought you needed the space for some other expansion, because you didn't think that we should be in the baseball business, that it was a wrong location? What was it?
I think it's a variety of things. I will say that as a whole, the group was very favorable to baseball. Feels like we are a baseball community and it's important to our town. The decision wasn't based on whether we liked baseball or not. It was whether that was the right location for the particular stadium. So we like baseball. What was the second half of your question?
Yeah, well, it was just really what your why you didn't think that why your vision was that there wouldn't be a stadium there in 20 years.
We felt like the additional growth of the convention center space was probably more important than that as a location for baseball, given the cost of parking facilities and the need that we were going to have additional parking needs if we do add a hotel, if we do add a convention center space, that space was probably better served in that mix than as a baseball stadium.
Okay, and last two things. I've had plenty of discussions with Terry and others, and there is an argument that they actually although they may compete, there'd be a lot of complement, and that there's certain groups that they're be coming from maybe more national, and they're going to want to be downtown, no question. And there may be more local shows like a farm show, and they're going to want to be out there. So there could be some. It may not be. They may not collide as much as we think. However, I guess what I continue to struggle with, and I've said this over the years, is this what I call the sunk cost fallacy. And I heard it in this group, and I respect it, and I get it, but I've just had a struggle with we built it out there, we can't move it, and therefore we should double the size of it. I so much struggle with that, and I'm assuming your group must have as well.
For sure we did. And that's why you see in the additional considerations, it talks about additional convention center space. We had a lot of conversation about trying to circle the conversation back to the scope of our work, which was to focus on this particular campus. And based on the input we received from people like the CVB, the Sports Authority, some of those user groups, that they wanted additional space there. That doesn't mean that additional space couldn't be successful elsewhere. It just wasn't within the scope of our conversation.
Okay, well, I think the discussion is going to be a cost benefit for what we're putting in, how many conventions are we going to get, and then how much spillover spending do you get, which out there, last comment, the arena, what was really interesting is you had one meeting where there was a very detailed discussion, maybe you had a subgroup that actually looked at it, and they looked at the feasibility, and they looked and there was things about the arc of the ceiling, and because like in the CSL report, it talked about making 2 levels, things like that, and it turns out that there wasn't a way that it would be like really usable space. So maybe talk a little bit about that for the benefit of the public, and then also the payback, because it's maybe 600 to 800, maybe net loss, I don't remember, that we're losing on the arena versus if you just were to tear it down, it might have been 1.5 million, something like that. And finally, would you foresee potentially that you could tear it down and then wait a few years and figure out what to do, or does it all have to happen together, that you do this and you build, or you get into that? Sorry, a lot of questions.
That is a lot of questions strung together, so you're going to have to help me. Okay. In terms of the timing, we didn't go down that road in great detail. Given the fact that it's not used that much, that there are alternate locations for the existing user groups, we felt like it was probably a priority to tear it down sooner rather than later, because I think your number's right, and I don't remember them all off the top of my head. I do feel like it was 600 and some thousand a year average that the city is losing on running that particular facility. So we'll kind of have to see how that goes.
Okay, and I would just, my last piece of commentary, just for the public's sake, I wouldn't propose tearing down an event facility because it loses money. Sometimes there's a wonderful benefit to a community. It's just that the user experience and what it would take to get it up to snuff, and the fact of people have moved on, I think it's just lived its life. It's not because it's losing money. So just
I have many fond memories of the arena myself.
Myself as a kid.
But it's one of those facilities that's probably lived its useful life for us as a community. The other part of your earlier question was talking about reusing and the numbers for kind of re-engineering the arena. We did, again, as I mentioned before, we had some architects, we had some builders, some developers that really tried to dig into the numbers on what it would take. And the difficulty of taking off part of the roof, getting the steel you would need inside that facility to build 2 floors, it just became cost prohibitive, and it just didn't make economic sense, at least to the group, to go down that road. It seemed like a much more logical conversation to use that space for a different type of use.
Thank you, and thank you for the work of your group.
Councilor Staley.
Thank you, Dan. A few questions. Councilor Neitzer referenced 1.5 million to tear the arena down. Was that a figure that I guess I don't remember?
That rings a bell. That sounds about right. And these were just estimates.
What can you give us a ballpark figure of the whole project?
I can't, no. There are too many variables in the conversation yet to give a detailed number. We talk in general, for instance, about 60,000 square feet of convention center space. That space has to be better programmed before you know what sort of build-out cost that's going to take.
And what's the timeline for this? I mean, when do you plan on having us vote on something?
I'm not planning on any vote at this particular time. I think that's the.
Because,
that
but it
might
was
be-
going to come before the council at some point. The mayor had said this would be before the council to approve.
I don't think the community's to the point where they've decided what they want to do or what they want to
Okay,
vote on yet.
great. So I wanted to talk to you about where it says additional convention space, that you're talking about lending support to any, you think the city should lend support to off-site or downtown convention space. What does that mean?
I think that's in reference to kind of our earlier conversation point about, we heard so much testimony on the need for convention center space that, and even though our scope was just on here and we felt like this campus could support an additional 60,000 square feet, that the community as a whole probably could support additional convention center space wherever that may
But,
be.
and so when I see that, I'm thinking that you're indicating that we should put some tax dollars into helping them build that? Because when it says that you are saying that the city should consider, so are you talking that we would help financially with that?
We never had a conversation like that. I think as a concept, we like the city supporting additional convention center space. But we never had a conversation about supporting it financially, or if so, to what degree.
But you understand why I would say that, because it says that the city would consider, in addition to the convention center expansion, lending support to any off-site or downtown convention space. So I'm thinking, are we talking about the Sioux Steel project?
At the time, that wasn't announced, or we didn't know what was going to take place at that particular location. It was just one of those topics where there was
Okay.
potential in a variety of areas.
And then you're talking about, Councilor Kiley indicated moving the stadium somewhere. And I know in the past the discussion was to have it moved downtown, and then I've been told by people that there's no room downtown. So right now that's just a big question mark?
I think it's one of those questions that needs to be answered, and probably at a later date. Again, to our scope, we looked at the long term of the campus and said that that space is probably better suited for something else.
And lastly, Dan, I do need to say that we have a population of we're talking about 180,000 people or more. So when we're basing things on a online response of 1,200 people, to me, that really isn't representative of the whole entire community. And I said this when I first appeared before your group, when you so graciously opened it to the public to come, that first meeting. But I said the word vote, public vote. And I think when we're talking about bonding for, we don't know how much, at some point, I think the citizens are getting more and more a little skittish about lots of borrowing, and they don't get a voice in it. So I would say that whatever package you come up with, I would love to see the mayor and his administration say, just like Mayor Huther did, we're going to bring this, put it together, show you what we got, and then let you vote on this. Because, this is their facility, the citizens. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Sure. Outside of our scope, but if there's not any other questions, counselors, I appreciate your time. I'm going to let Mr. Eckhoff take over. Thanks, Dan.
Just in respect of time, I'll go through this as quick as I can. Lots of good questions about process, and that's where the city's role now takes over from the study group. So from the recommendations, what we've done in planning and development services is we formed a work group, and Russ Sorensen is leading that. We've met with the different stakeholders in the process. We've studied their report, and what we're trying to do is put together a scope of work. We're trying to look at things like, from the planning side, we're looking at things like, what is the true area of the campus? Is it just the Denny, or does it include these other properties we've talked about? What's the current land usage? What's the ownership of that land usage? What other businesses are there? What businesses do we know that are coming into that area? What does that growth look like? What's connectivity and transportation look like? And all those types of things in any planned development to set up the scope of what we think could happen on that site. The next step would be then to probably put on RFP for a consultant to do a master plan. but to look at it from a marketability standpoint, right? What types of things fit out there? What types of events would work? What size of events? What frequency? There are some unique things that can be done with that space, right? That wouldn't be competitive with downtown. What we believe, and of course, by the time we get down the road, we'll know more. But the downtown convention space that Sioux Steel is proposing is very unique. And it's very much more traditional. Those of you who have been to conferences, it's multi-level types of meeting rooms. The big open, the farm show, those types of things. There's some unique advantages that can be built in out there. But is it 60,000 square feet? Can we fill 60,000 square feet? If we bring somebody that knows what they're doing, that can do that market analysis, they can tell us that. Or maybe we build it in phases. How do we build the space the most efficient way that we can? What's the highest and best use for that land? So that would probably be the scope of the master plan. And from that would then come preliminary design and all those things, and the financing was way down the road. And of course, as that happens, like it would with any public building project, that comes before this body, and we work through that process and decide whether that's something that we want to fund, how does it fit our CIP, what's the timing of that. So, you know, let's just say we're moving ahead and we're going to actually build something. You know, we're probably 2 to 4 years away from actually putting a spade in the ground just because of the process that we want to go to. And whether there's a public referendum on a vote or whether we vote from the beginning, that's kind of this body's and administration's decision. But that is way ahead of the game because we don't know what it is we want to build yet. But that's the process that we hope to go through. And just our intent is to have a report to the mayor by the end of January. And then once he's had a chance to digest that and work through it, we'll probably come back to this body and give our report on what we think the next steps should be towards developing the master plan.
Other questions? Councilor Erickson?
Not for director, so I guess I'll wait if anybody has questions for Director Eckhoff.
Yes.
You said the end of January. Can you clarify the timeline a little bit? By the end of January, you hope to have?
Well, a scope of work
Okay.
for the master plan. So kind of a recommendation on how the RFP might look, what the steps of that, what the timing of that would be that we would present to the mayor. And then we'd have to make the decision, okay, are we going to go forward? Are we going to put out an RFP based on our recommendation? What does that RFP look like? Who would we, what would be the things we'd want covered in that?
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Kind of our work plan.
So, yeah, Councilor Staley.
So Jeff, you just back it up a little bit. You talked about a referendum. You threw the vote issue out.
That's always an option. I suppose this body could put onto it, yes.
Well, so does that come, would that come before everything, the RFP, or would that come after you get everything
That would come at the
packaged?
time that you actually start the financing process. I mean, until we have a project and it's in some preliminary design, we don't know what the cost is, right? So we don't know what we're actually talking about from a financing standpoint.
Because, well, like with Huther and the event center, I didn't think it had been put together yet. Maybe Counselor Neitzer, were you following it back then? I thought that we voted on we voted on the amount, and then I think he put it together after that.
I can't speak to that. I don't know how that went, but I would think you need an amount to work from.
Well, yeah, as I
Amount.
recall, the referendum was to build an event center with spending up to X amount or something like that, 115 million or, I mean, they had a number in mind. I don't think they had a schematic design done, but, you know, it was well more down the road. It wasn't just an idea of, hey, let's just build a building. So, and we haven't even gotten to the idea that we're building a building yet.
That's correct.
So.
And there, I mean, I think in Dan's report, it talked about, there's someplace it talked about like 5 years. It was probably a timeline before they started thinking, and so that obviously depends on a lot of things that we'll, as we walk down the path, we'll encounter what those things look like, what the time frame becomes around that.
Anybody else? Councilor Starr.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Probably more generic, my comments. Interesting how we balanced the CSL report and what the consultant told us with where we were dreaming bigger than they told us we were probably ready to go. And that's where I'm kind of, it's fun to go through that dreaming process, but I keep going back to that because that was the last objective spot of what we could support, what regional events were available, were really addressed in that report quite a bit. The other thing that stood out to me is I'm not surprised by the 70% of people in the community have been at the arena in the last 2 years. when you start looking at the type of events that have been there, whether it's the number of people that go to the circus and take their family there, the arena has been a family, affordable type of location for events, whether it's safety fairs, the marathon that does their registration and has trade shows there. You can start going through, like I said, the circus, the number of people who went to Augustana games, different sporting events. When I look at the arena and then I balance that with the CSL report, it's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money in the big picture. That their recommendation was for, I can't believe I'm going to say it this way, but there are, for a couple $1 million, remodeling new seats, updating the bathrooms, we could continue to have a facility that provided family entertainment at an affordable rate for those type of groups, whether it was the Shrine with the circus, and continue to do safety family events, the number of things that were there. I don't think that 70% is misleading. I think it really shows how people, a majority of the community, are able to use that facility and continue to use that facility, and that it makes probably more sense to remodel and upgrade, because the structure itself isn't going to get any more solid than it continues to be. I don't think there were ever any engineering reports that say the structure is what it is degrading. The other thing with the baseball stadium, you know, it's been my position from the time I joined the council, is that we don't put money into structures and events until we know what we're going to do long term. And we've done a good job of backing off as the council of putting in the life safety things that we've needed to do. We've put the netting in that we'll now, that is affecting baseball stadiums across the country and people getting foul balls. But there's nothing more frustrating for residents than to hear that we put millions into something and then we're knocking it down 2 years later. So I think we've been very prudent over the last couple of years of saying, hey, let's slow down if we're going to move this thing and it doesn't make sense to be there. And we continue to put some of those dollars into Harmadon and some of the other places that we continue to do baseball. Augustana's done a great job with their facility that's very small, with their wood bat league and some of the things and the experiences of baseball in our community. So contracts change, people come and go, things can be updated as we know. So I'm not that opposed to it, but in the big picture of things, we need to dream for the next 20 years, but we have to be realistic. So I'm appreciative that the next step really is it feasible of where we want to go? And we always say we're Sioux Falls and we can do so much more than when the consultant comes in and tells us what we can do. But at the same time, we have to balance what the taxpayers are willing to do for quality of life with other needs that we do when we put budgets together. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? So timeline-wise, I mean, everybody's looking for kind of an idea, and it's probably, again, it's too early. But I mean, is it safe to say this is probably a vision for 2025? Would maybe it'd be done, and probably another year or two before it'd be in front of us at least?
It's probably a year away from having a lot of things solid to you, but a lot of that depends on how fast we move in the process, how the consultant goes. We're talking a little bit with finance and CIP, kind of trying to program long-term some of those consultant costs and those types of things. So it's all, you know, as you know, it's all interconnected. Right. So it's tough to give you a firm time frame right now, but we did kind of pencil it out, and yeah, it's somewhere between 2 years to probably 4 years when we have a solid plan, but hopefully it's somewhere in there.
It's a first step anyway, yeah. Thanks for your work on this. Oh, Councilor Brecky.
Just this is being presented to us at an informational briefing as the results of the committee's study. Am I understanding that the administration at this point is moving forward with their recommendations? I mean, with the recommendations, you know, as proposed, or could that change, you know, as you guys, you know, move into that next stage?
Well, I can't speak for the whole administration. I just know that we started with this report as our starting point, as our premise.
Okay, so that,
because
again, they're recommending, you know, tearing down the, you know, or moving the Canary Stadium, tearing down the arena. I'm just kind of wondering, is the administration on board, you know, basically speaking with those recommendations? But you, I guess, reserve the right to fine tune them as you know, come forward with things, because that's what we're getting is just a committee's recommendations at this point. But I'm just wondering the level of commitment, you know, at the administrative level to moving forward with the recommendations as they are.
Those will be the next conversation we have with you after we've talked
So
with administration.
you're still talking about that. Okay, so there's really, again, it's truly informational at this point, just
Yes.
bringing us in the loop.
Yes,
Appreciate
yeah,
that. Thank you.
We're early into the stage of our work, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our next presentation today will be on mass transit, the on-demand pilot. Welcome. Hello.
Hi, Allie Hartzler, Innovation Coordinator. I'm excited to be here today with Sam and Jason and our partners at Sioux Area Metro to give you guys a brief update on where we're at with our mass transit on-demand pilot. A couple things we're going to talk about. We're going to take a few minutes to just step back and actually talk about the mobility on-demand landscape as a whole before we dive into some of the specifics that we're hoping to see executed in our pilot program. Before we talk about the on-demand landscape, I actually want to share a win with you guys. So we have just gotten so much positive momentum and feedback from our community that they're really stepping up in some really cool ways to support our work on this project. The Sioux Falls Design Center actually applied for 2 separate grants on our behalf. So we have received a combined $35,000, both from the South Dakota Community Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts to support the marketing of our future pilot. So all of the funding goes directly to the Sioux Falls Design Center, but we're really excited to have such brilliant sort of marketing minds behind how we get people to try this and what we name it. All of those different elements will be something that the Sioux Falls Design Center is going to help support. So we're really excited to see our community step up in that way and kind of encourage us along the way. Awesome. So before we talk about what we're hoping to do in Sioux Falls, I want to spend a few minutes just clarifying the landscape of mobility on demand. And first, we want to talk a bit about different types of public transit. So one is mass transit, which is what we're doing here today in Sioux Falls. We have these 35-foot buses, which you can see on the right, that are designed to move mass amounts of people at one time. On the left, you can see a microtransit vehicle, which is much smaller, designed to move 2 to 8 people at any one time. That is not what we're proposing, and we'll talk more about what we are proposing, but just want to make that clarification. The second thing we want to talk about is different types of transit service. So today, our service delivery is fixed route, which means our buses move along the same routes every day at the same time, on schedule. Alternatively, on-demand is based on demand. It uses data and autonomous vehicle routing software to change where these vehicles are going based on where our passengers actually want to go. So just want to spend a little bit of time clarifying some of those distinctions and making sure we're all speaking the same language when we talk about the actual pilot program. Even though this is new for us, there is a ton of saturation in the industry already. So this list just shows you some of the mobility on-demand vendors in the space. Many of them are figuring this out as they go, just like we are, but we just show this to say that we're not the first to try to do this, and we try to learn from others that have taken this on before. One of those vendors specifically is an organization called VIA. This map shows you all of the different pilot programs that they're currently running. So you can see all over the world, there's lots of different cities trying to figure out how they can use this on-demand technology and all this data to make their system work more effectively. Ourselves, we have specifically had conversations with the city of South Bend, Indiana, Detroit, Michigan, Newton, Massachusetts, and Salt Lake City. We've really benefited from actually talking to these boots on the ground folks who have implemented some type of on-demand program to see what we can learn about the service that we're proposing. So that's a little bit about the landscape and how we have tried to learn from others who have come before us. Which brings us to what we want to do in our own community. Today I'm going to share with you what we are proposing for our pilot, but I want to put a big asterisk by it and say that it kind of depends on whatever vendor we end up selecting is going to have some weight into how we actually execute this. So the topics that we'll talk about today are things that we discussed as a transit core team and came to a recommendation, but it will really ultimately decide that vendor relationship, what they believe the best course of action will be. So I want to just start by giving us a definition of what a mass transit on-demand pilot actually is. So we think of it as a focused experiment that will provide transit service using an on-demand model with existing buses. So what does that actually look like in implementation? I want to talk through some of the pilot details. One of the things that we talked about the most is what day of the week does it make the most sense for us to test this on? I know we've talked a bit about this before, but where we landed is we believe that Saturdays is the best place to start. One of those reasons is because it will impact fewer people. On an average weekday, we estimate that there's about 491 unique individuals using the system, and on a Saturday, there's currently, we estimate, about 92. Of course, we want this to have a big reach if it's successful, but while we're learning if it works, we want to be able to control it as much as possible. So we like that Saturday is a smaller group of people. It also eliminates the need to hire additional drivers. On Saturday, we currently operate our service with 8 buses en route. If we continue to do that, we won't need to hire any additional drivers, which makes our life and Sioux Area Metro's life a little bit easier. And last, operating on Saturdays allows us to capture comparable data. So even though we would love to try this on Sundays, because we know that there's a huge demand from our riders for that, it doesn't allow us to understand operationally, does this save the cost compared to a Saturday? So we love that it gives us that comparable data. Another heated discussion that the core team had was fares. Where we landed with this is our recommendation is to keep fares as they are. The primary reason for this is we don't want there to be any barriers for someone to try this new system. That isn't to say in the future we won't reevaluate that decision, but for this pilot program, we believe that the fares should be consistent. Again, it gives us that comparable data. It also makes it easier to explain from a marketing perspective. So that's kind of our recommendation from a fare perspective. When it comes to service area, for the initial launch, we are also recommending maintaining our current Saturday service area. So our service on Saturdays currently operates from 7:45 a.m. to 6:45 p.m. It is a smaller service area than it is during the week. Both the colored areas are what we would operate in, and that's our current Saturday service area. Again, it gives us that comparable data. It maintains current operating costs, meaning for the moment, we won't have to change the way we're operating our paratransit services. And again, it kind of simplifies that marketing messaging. And all of this, of course, is just a starting point. As we launch this pilot and learn what's working and what's not, we have a ton of wiggle room to tweak and make changes. And that really is the intention behind this. Also want to highlight just a few sort of goals from a user experience perspective. So this pilot is designed to provide same-day shared rides, meaning you get to request the ride for that same day, and the expectation is that there's going to be others using the service simultaneously with you. We aim to offer the ability to schedule rides via smartphone, traditional phone, computer, or phone concierge service. The service would ideally be corner to corner. Just for context right now, 88% of our riders live within 0 to 5 blocks of a bus stop. We're aiming that our current service will pick people up between 0 to 3 blocks. And lastly, the service will use both existing bus stops and add virtual stops. So if we want to get people in that smaller radius, we're going to have to add bus stops. They're not going to be physical, they're going to be virtual. And we don't know where those are yet, but that's something that we anticipate our vendor will help us kind of guide from an accessibility standpoint, the best place for those. So what happens if we launch? We can't predict what will happen. This is why we pilot things, to test it and see how it works. But we want to have a few backup plans in case things go well and in case things don't. So that's really what this slide is intended to visualize. So if we launch on a Saturday and we meet our target outcomes, our recommendation is that we would then expand our Saturday service to the entire city of Sioux Falls footprint, or excuse me, the entire regular weekday route service area. That would then give us the data to see how a weekday expanded service area would perform. If that's successful, we would look at the next iteration. So the idea behind this is we're incremental changing until we find something that doesn't work. Alternatively, if we launch on Saturdays and our outcomes aren't met, we would really have to take a step back and understand why, see if there's an alternative execution. So should we try evenings? Should we try Sundays? And if that's unsuccessful, the option is always to return to regular service while we reevaluate other ideas. But the idea here is really to be open to change as we go through this process. This part is really important to me of how this feels to the person who's actually riding the bus. So I want to show you a real world example of a person on a Saturday today. If they're trying to go from the Cubby's gas station on 12th Street to the Walmart on the east side, that trip would take them 45 minutes on the bus. That does not include walking time to the bus stop. That just is, you're there, you hop downtown, transfer, and go across town. We estimate with our proposed pilot, because you're eliminating all of that travel on those fixed routes, that this would take about 30 minutes. That's a 33% decrease in trip time. It may be 15 minutes doesn't seem like a lot, but over time, that really adds up and gives our residents more time that they can spend working, being entertained, all those different types of things. So we're really excited about the potential impact to improve residents' lives. So that's a bit about what we're hoping to see from an executional standpoint with the pilot, and I'm going to turn it over to Sam, who's going to talk through some of our specific next steps.
Welcome, Sam.
Evening, Sam Trebilcock, City Planning. So there's been a lot of work done up to this point on coming up with this innovative idea, and as Ali did a great job of going over that with you. But the next steps, and how are we going to take this this idea and pilot it and do something on the ground? So that's kind of what my job is today, to kind of explain that to you. So the first step really is we're looking at submitting or to issuing a request for proposals. And some of the information that we have in that request for proposal, that scope of work is listed here on the slide. But really what we're trying to do is try to get a software vendor for a software platform for a mass transit on demand that's working with existing SAM buses, drivers, and staff. So that's right within the request for proposals. There's also the marketing and training support that we want the vendor to be involved with. We certainly want to look at optional services other than just the technology component. We want the phone option. But the goal, again, is to provide better service, again, right from the RFP, provide better service for transit customers and understand how on-demand mass transit service can be utilized to improve efficiencies, costs, and productivity of the system. So, again, it's really important that we get, something out onto the street and see what kind of interest we get from these vendors and some of the vendors that even Ali had mentioned. We think there's a lot of interest out there. This is an industry that's really pretty hot on these kind of services. But again, this is an idea that we want to try to pilot and try and see how it works. And so again, from starting out, the release of the RFP would be here at the end of this week. Proposals will be due in the middle of January. Review of the proposals will be in early February. And then presentations, we would expect there to be presentations by the software vendors, a number of them that we would shortlist. And that would be in the mid-February. And then contract award, if we find somebody if we think is going to work and we can recommend to you as a council, we would award the contract at the end of February and then bring something in for contract approval in front of council sometime in March. So as a part of that RFP, we certainly have a selection committee that we formed. We have a public transit advisory board member. We have a Sioux Area Metro employee that's involved, city council member, Representative Councilor Kiley is included in the selection committee, and then a number of transit core team members are involved in that RFP selection committee. So then in terms of proposed timeline, just to kind of give you an idea where we're trying and where we're heading with this entire process to try to pilot this. Again, issuing the RFP in December, trying to get to that, executing the contract in March. Once we have a vendor here, as Ali was talking about, there's still a lot of work to be done. And we want to make sure that the public is involved in that process. So whether or not it's an open house or some time of public involvement, it's going to be really important with that vendor to try to figure out how this is going to work on the ground. And so we're also including, simulation plans. That's going to have to be done before we start that actual Saturday service, or what we would expect to be Saturday service to launch that pilot. There's developing a marketing plan that needs to take place. There's training that needs to take place, and work very closely with Sioux Area Metro. And as we're just starting and continue to do with that process with Sioux Area Metro, that's going to be really important as part of that process. So as we move forward, there's going to need to be changes, a public hearing at PTAB, and of course a council resolution on route changes, because you are running a different, pretty major change in your routing and your services. So we'll do that in the spring and early summer, and then we're hoping to launch the pilot in the summer, early fall. So that kind of takes you a kind of a quick process. We're looking at, that 3 to 5 month period coming in once we have the vendor in place. But beyond that, all of us would certainly entertain any questions that you have.
Thank you, Sam and Ali. Great presentation, good information. Open it up to the council. Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I appreciate that. I know we've been talking about this, and there's been a lot of people doing a lot of work for this. So my first question, I've got two main questions. My first one being, list the goals of what you're trying to accomplish here. Is it to save money? Is it to save time? I mean, time is money. I mean, we all are busy. And so if we can talk a little bit about that too.
Great question. So from a business perspective, the metric that's the most important to us is the number of passengers we can move per hour. Right now, we're moving 12.1 on average. We are targeting 20. That is what's going to allow us to operate more efficiently. Right. So we have a lot of metrics, but that's the key for us. From a resident side, we're measuring our estimated trip time.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then Sam, or you, or whoever wants to talk about it, I've kind of been beating the paratransit drum. Talk to me about how this impacts paratransit. Anytime any changes are made, what happens to that? I just want to be super mindful that anytime you expand services, it's really hard to take anything away. And we've had to make some difficult decisions and rein some stuff in over the years, as well as touch on agency rides and how that may be impacted as well.
Great question. I'll let Sam address that.
So yes, when we do the pilot, it's going to be on that Saturday, and it's going to be within the same service area. So paratransit will have the same services during that time. So paratransit will be unaffected by that, because we're not going to expand service during that time. If we start iterating service to the point where we expand service area, and we find that that can be done as a part of this, because we can do it with less vehicles, and we can expand use those vehicles to expand service area. Of course, we'd have to come up front of council first to do that, and go back to PTAB. Then we would have to start talking about, how can we do that with paratransit? How does that affect paratransit? Do we need to add vehicles or not? Or can this service that we're utilizing, we're finding that paratransit users can use it more? And so all those things would have to come into the consideration.
So if I'm a paratransit user, will I have the same opportunity being a paratransit user, and this program will mimic both? Or is it just for the other ridership?
Well, it's going to be operating just with the mass transit on-demand service.
And not para?
So paratransit, I mean, just like if you think about it with fixed route, you can go to
Right, it's different.
to a fixed route right now and you can jump on a bus. So it's basically the same thing. Paratransit, you still have to call ahead. Same thing would still take place, yeah.
Okay. But it is an option that could, I
Right.
mean, think of the opportunities for those that maybe don't want to wait for that door-to-door service and have this opportunity to maybe move a little bit quicker if they're able to move through that, because time is important to everyone. I don't care who you are, it's important. So I could see the opportunity being great for that. The last question I have is if this impacts the contract to Sioux Area Metro in any way, shape, or form, because I know we just approved a contract with them last year, I want to say. So if these changes will impact Sioux Area Metro at all.
No, and we've been talking to Sioux Area Metro about that, and we would not anticipate there would be any effect to the contract at all.
Thank you.
Next, we have Councilor Kiley, and then Councilor Staley will follow.
Okay, thank you. Ally, good job.
Thank you.
I know that there's been a lot of time invested by the transit core team over the last several months. And
Almost a year. I think it has been a year now.
it has been.
We even
And
had cake.
I've had the opportunity to attend a number of those meetings and enjoyed my participation in those. So good job. I mean, great plan coming forward here. Goals, I thought that was a great question from Councilor Erickson. I'll tell you one of my goals as a counselor, and always has been a goal of mine for nearly 6 years now since I've been on the council, is to increase our ridership. And I hope that this proves that we can do that. And I think convenience is a key to increasing ridership, and on demand, if successful, will obviously do that and decrease the amount of time in transit too. So, I mean, it's increasing ridership, I mean, just for the basic reason that it's an environmentally friendly thing to do. It's something that we should all be considering doing. Mm-hmm. And it has benefits in other areas too. Less traffic on our roadways, so it extends the life of our infrastructure. So there's a lot of positives that can come out of this, besides just saving our environment, less CO2 and everything else. Yeah. The paratransit, in a way, paratransit is operating on demand now. It's just that they have to call 24 hours in advance, yes. Which is, I know, something that I, as a counselor, would love to work on to increase the convenience level for our users of paratransit. As you know, I'm a staunch supporter of our paratransit system. And so I do understand that because we're not adjusting the area that we're serving, that it will not have any impact on paratransit at this time until we expand that service area. Wise decision, I believe, to work on Saturdays, and because it's doing so allows you to do the comparables that you had mentioned, maintain your fares at the same level, which eliminates a variable, because if you have a lower fare or increased fare, you don't know what the results are from. Is it because I decreased the fare and now invited more ridership, or I increased the fare and discouraged people?
Were you in the room listening to us when we debated this?
It's just basic scientific methodology, yeah. Is what it is. And then the same applies with your service area too, because now you have the direct comparables. So I look forward with moving forward on this. And as you point out, it may not be successful. There's plans. If it is, to go to the next step, and there's plans to reevaluation if it doesn't. But there's never a guarantee in life, especially when we're doing things of this nature. But unless we try something, we're not going to improve what we currently have upon. And I think most of us are in agreement that what we have needs improvement. So I appreciate your effort over the last several months to the last year. So thank you.
Thank you.
Counselor Staley.
First of all, Jason Reisdorfer, thank you for meeting with Counselor Brecky and I several months ago, I believe. At that time, we had the conversation. He asked us, what do you think about using a Saturday and staying within the boundaries that are already serviced? And I thought that would have been the best route, and it sounds like that's what you're doing, so that I appreciate that. A few questions. When you say unique riders, what does that mean, a unique rider?
So a unique rider is an individual person. So I, Allie Hartzler, am one unique rider. If I go from Cubby's to Walmart, and to do that I have to transfer downtown, that's one trip, 2 rides, 1 unique rider. Does that make sense?
Okay, because I thought maybe when you say 491 weekdays, I thought maybe that meant consistent riders. Because at some point, right, you're getting a consistency.
Yeah, they probably are consistent, yes.
So, versus just a random rider. So we don't have any data on who the consistent ones are versus just an unusual rider.
Correct.
How long do you plan to do the pilot?
So the budget that we have, based on our initial software estimations of how much it will cost, we believe, including planning, that we can operate the pilot for 12 months. We really are just waiting to see what works and what doesn't.
Okay, so maybe 12 months.
Yes.
Another question, if we go to slide 16. Logistically, so right now, we've got the bus is leaving and heading to the east, and it's jogging up, right, and picking those people up to the north?
Right.
So when you're smoothing that out, so it's just going straight east and west, but who's going to service those people in the north part? How are those people who are getting picked up now, how are they going to fit into the scheme of things?
So the system will operate using data. Those people in the north or in the south will all be serviced equally, but instead of a bus driving along, assuming that it's going to pick up passengers, the algorithm is smart enough to say, oh, there's someone who lives on North Cliff, and actually there's a car right above them that's closer, and this person down here is actually going this way. So the short answer to your question is the algorithm uses data to make that decision, but all residents would be served equally.
But it could happen that the bus would still jog, if there wasn't something nearby, because these buses are not going to be on a fixed time schedule.
Correct.
Right? So let's say John Doe, my favorite person, John Doe. John Doe has to leave for work every morning at 8 o'clock. He's been able to pick the bus up. He gets there at 10 to 8. Mm-hmm. That will no longer be a guaranteed for him.
So what we've requested in the request for proposal is that the software has the capability to request a ride based on arrival time or departure time. So if John has to get to work by 9 a.m., he can request a ride to be a guarantee that he arrives to work at 9 a.m. So even though he might not depart at the same time every day, he does have the control to kind of say, I need to be at this location at this time.
But how will he know what time he's supposed to be at the bus stop then?
The software will be able to communicate that through him. If he uses the app, it will be through the app. If it's the phone, he probably would get a phone call, but we're still working through exactly what that would look like. He also can schedule, we've requested that the software can do recurring rides. We know many of our riders with cognitive impairments don't have the ability to every day figure out a new location. So for those individuals or for people going to work at the same time every day, we want to be able to just say, I'm Allie, I live at this address, I need to be picked up every day at 7:45 to get to work by 8.
And lastly, my questions is the RFP process. I would request that we are able to see those proposals before we have to vote on the contract. And I would just, I'm referencing back to like the golf course contract, but we've had different instances within my tenure on the council where we're given something and said, this is the best decision, and we haven't been able to see the other options. Redacted if necessary, the proprietary information, show it to us in executive session, but that's going to help us go out to sell this to the public when we actually have seen what was offered, and to be able to say, yes, we agree this was the best choice. That's my request.
I'll see what we can do.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? If not, I have a few notes that I took. First of all, I did ride VIA in Arlington, Texas.
Did you really?
I did. Yeah, recently.
I would love to hear about it.
Yeah,
Maybe another time.
Yeah, it was, so it was a good perspective. It was really, really helpful. And as you may know, because I think you may have looked at Arlington, Texas as well, they had the very, very good benefit of they had no transit system before. So
And it's a suburb of Houston, right? I think?
Dallas.
Dallas, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, yep. So, yes, and they were, I think they were 400,000, something like that. So they're somewhat comparable and in their square mileage.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually very interesting because it's working out pretty well. And just for the benefit of everybody else, they actually started with one sort of area of town, and they're adding more to the budget, and they're just kind of slowly expanding it, and it's kind of coming in. It's been more favorable than they thought, and it's been working quite well. And I found it to be a pretty nice user experience. So it was very interesting. So now, of course, that's a smaller vehicle, but it was an interesting thing. I've been reading, and I'm glad you're going down. The question I did have, actually, before I go to that, I was going to ask you, what are outcomes? Is that basically that slide that you showed with all of those metrics? Is that synonymous?
Yes.
Those are the outcomes you're going for?
Yes.
Okay. It's been interesting because as I've been reading, I'll just share a few things. I'm working on a great book that just came out on mass transit, and it has a bunch of case studies of different communities and what's worked, and it's been really great. And so one of the things that they've been talking about and I want to hit on is, and this is something that you, I'm sure, have struggled with, and you will continue to, and we will, is something they call the variation of the Pareto principle, which is essentially that no matter what change you make, it's almost impossible to make a change to a service and not impact somebody negatively. Mm-hmm. And there's some of these communities were paralyzed by that they couldn't make any change because there were some users, even a very, very small amount, that were going to be impacted because no matter what, if you move the service at all, somebody may not be able to get to this, the same time that they did before, but they were paralyzed by that, so that maybe those handful of people, they didn't make change, and then you had all of these other users, potential users, that weren't using the service, and they were frozen. And so that's something I think we all have to kind of be willing to try things, and that's where I think this pilot is a good thing, because we can try it. If it doesn't work, it's a pilot.
Yes, exactly. We know it's not going to go perfectly smoothly, and we're excited to figure out what those bumps are so we can roll it out.
And a few of the other things that it talked about was, it made mention that, and this was from their data, was that, and I don't think you're going down this route, but if you get fixated, sometimes people think if we just add Wi-Fi to the buses and we don't change it at all, or if we add these bells and whistles, that it will increase ridership, and it really just doesn't move the needle, and it ended up being very, very simple. The way that ridership increased was basically people want to be picked up in a pretty quick time frame from when they get to the bus stop or they request a ride. They want to get to where they're going in a reasonable amount of time. So there were some just very, very simple things, and that's where they called like level of service, for example. And you may not be able to talk about the details of the RFP because it hasn't been released yet, but I would assume that'll be in there, like a level of service, because Arlington talked about that, where they said, if we said that you have to pick everybody up in 5 minutes, that's one price. If you want people picked up within 15, that's another price.
So our fare structure is that no matter how much time or distance your ride is, it's going to cost the same.
Yeah.
We do have several trip time outcomes included in the RFP, and many of them are here. So 90% of our trips are 30 minutes or less, 80% of rides completed. I don't know if this has ever happened to you guys, but I've like missed a Lyft ride before just because, you know, I just wasn't ready to go. So that's important for us, is we can't have people requesting rides and then not taking them. So we do have some metrics like this that we will be holding our vendor accountable to, or trying to get to alongside them.
Okay.
Which is something that we learned from conversations with other cities who did not do that and recommended it to us.
Your entire group's probably well ahead of me, but I'll have to make sure I get you the name of the book. Maybe there'll be something.
I would love that.
Something new, so. Looks like that's all there is, if there's nothing else. Thank you very much. Thanks for the presentation. Next up is Sioux Falls Connects Bus Rapid Transit, BRT. Our Assistant City Engineer, Kurt Peppel, is going to make that presentation.
Good afternoon, Council. Kurt Peppel with the City Engineer's Office. It's not very often I get to say good afternoon. Usually it's last item in the end of the night.
Good night.
Sioux Falls Connects. Sioux Falls Connects is what we have branded our study on an activity center connector, also known as a bus rapid transit or a BRT. What is BRT? You're probably asking yourself, it's after 5 o'clock, why are you showing me pictures of your family? Well, we took these pictures. We weren't familiar with BRT either. It's about a year ago, we were in Disney. Either we were very excited to be at Disney or we were excited to be on a BRT. Without even knowing it, many of us in this room have been on a version of a BRT and probably didn't know it. There are BRTs all over the United States, all over the world. Regionally, Minneapolis has the C line, what just opened up earlier this summer, and Omaha is currently constructing infrastructure for a BRT along Dodge Street. So to kind of why we're here today, this past summer, city staff worked with a consultant on a feasibility study to determine if BRT is right for Sioux Falls. Through this study, we set a goal and a vision. The goal up there, I won't read it for you, but you can take a look at it. Some of the primary drivers that we were looking at was the events campus. How do we take care of some of the parking challenges without adding on-site capacity for parking? We have a thriving downtown. How do we make a better connection between downtown and that events campus? And again, BRT is a mode of transportation most cities are looking at or have already adopted. And like I said, the C line, Omaha, Phoenix, Cleveland, or just to name a few. Our study started out looking at some of the activity centers based on our goals and our drivers. The map on the left kind of shows some of the Sioux Falls activity centers, not all of them, just a few of them. And the map on the right focuses, kind of hones in on downtown, Falls Park, events campus, and then reaching out further north to the Sanford Sports Complex. Like I said, city staff and the consultant, HDR, locally helped us out. They brought in experts from Minneapolis, Phoenix, Omaha to help us guide us through this process. Some of the local stakeholders that we got involved in the process, we had either individual meetings or small group meetings with Downtown Sioux Falls, FSMG, CVB, some local hotels. The events campus study group was involved, Sioux Falls School District, and then also the Sanford Sports Complex. So based on these discussions, we started looking at some possible routes, what made sense for our BRT in Sioux Falls. Just kind of a starting point is, are we limited to this? Maybe in the long run looking at some different options, but right now let's focus in on downtown and our events campus. So the route that HDR helped us with starting downtown with a couple stops, moving up to Falls Park. A couple different routes could be considered from Falls Park to Russell Street, and then hitting the first destination as the Premier Center events campus, and then possibly doing more of an on-demand or per event type situation out to the Sanford Sports Complex. As we all know, the number of events that are happening out there is only going to continue to grow. This was just a slide that we had in a little brochure that we put together. It kind of shows where bus rapid transit fits into the transit hierarchy, and just going from a rideshare taxi all the way up to high-speed rail. So based on the discussions, HDR, stakeholders, we kind of came up with a pilot project concept. Main focus being to kind of revisit that map, going from downtown to the events campus, and then on demand up to the Sanford Sports Complex. We could use some of the existing equipment that we have. Maybe we look at repurposing some existing buses that the city has, put some preemption equipment in them to give them signal priority, rebrand them, make them look a little bit different so that they fit into our project and can be differentiated between the BRT and other transit services. Put up some message boards, put up either construct or dedicate a lane, potentially out at the events campus, so the BRT would have priority out there as well. Simple traffic control things, and then just some service assumptions. For the pilot, certain hours of the day, maybe that varies based on events, weekends. One thing that I thought was interesting is, every 15 minutes, going back to my Disney example, there was buses constantly that were in front of your face. You looked at your app, we were usually late, so you're sprinting from your hotel room to get out to the stop. They made a couple strategic stops, and then boom, you're off to the park. Well, just imagine that in downtown Sioux Falls. You're downtown having supper, you look at your app, the bus is gonna be here in less than 15 minutes because there's a bus every 15 minutes. Finish your food or drink, 15 minutes you're at the front door of a concert or whatever, and you are in covered parking downtown or wherever you choose to park. This slide just kind of looks at some of the pilot costs, and then we also looked at some of the potential revenue sources. HDR has seen these in other markets. So total pilot cost, around $1 million just based on preemption equipment and traffic control and maybe some pavement markings, different things, marketing campaign, working with the stakeholders on getting the information out to their customers to utilize the BRT as a good option for them. They don't have to park, they don't have to walk a long ways. They can be parking in a parking ramp downtown and get dropped off right at the front door of either the events campus facility or the Sanford Sports Complex. A few of the revenue situations, excuse me. Our study looked at a no fare situation. One thing about the BRT, it's rapid transit. If you're using a meter box to take fares, obviously that stuff takes time. You get a line of people. It's just not as efficient. What HDR had looked at is the fare box operation and maintenance may cost more than it's what you're getting out of it for our situation. So the revenue side, those are just some options. We're not saying that these are anything that we would ever consider. These are just options that they've seen in other markets to help either offset costs or fully fund a BRT. So after the pilot, there's some different scenarios. I'm not going to walk through all of it. You have the presentation, but scenario one would be a third-party contract that essentially we would put out an RFP, hire somebody to come in and provide this service. Scenario two, we would look at buying the equipment and then operating it ourselves. And so just some scenarios that we would consider if this would ever come to fruition, the information's in front of us. This is just a graphic that kind of lays out those two processes. Obviously, the duration difference is the manufacturer, if we had to go out and buy buses, just the lead time on getting the buses and things like that, so. Next steps. At this point, like I said, there's, from my perspective, there's no sense of urgency to move this along, but we want to be forward-thinking. We want to be prepared if an opportunity arises. We have a thriving downtown. You know, obviously, we just heard earlier about the events campus study groups recommendations. How this fits into that, I don't know. So this, some of the next steps, there would need to be a lot more conversations about this, but I think the work that was done this summer really puts us in a position to be down the road a little bit further rather than being caught off guard. And so just, those are some of the next steps. Looking at how we would operate this in some direction. Like I said, revenue, those are just some options. We need to revisit that. Marketing would be a huge thing. Getting, we have a lot of people that come into town for activities, concerts and conferences and such, making sure that the hotels and the ticket sales and the event venues are communicating to their customers that this service is available and to take advantage of it. And you know, what is a success? If we did a pilot project, what's success? Is it so many riders? Is it, you know, we'd have to define that. Identify strategic CIP opportunities. If this would be something we'd be looking at as we do road projects in this area, making sure that we're accounting for any drop-off locations or extra lanes or preemption equipment at certain signals, and determine alternative propulsion options. You know, is diesel the right option? Is natural gas? Is electric? We rode the C line, we rode an electric bus on their BRT. Very nice, very quiet, you know, very nice experience. And then, who knows, autonomous. Maybe there won't even be a driver. Maybe we just hop on and go. So that's all I have. I know there's some other folks that have been involved with this process here. If we'd entertain any questions, if I can't answer it, maybe somebody else can.
Councilor Sale.
Thank you. Kurt, great presentation. As we discussed tonight about moving people around Sioux Falls and traffic, one question I would have with your study is that the spots, the airport is not included in this. I would have assumed the airport would have been part of the initial study to drop off riders.
That came up several times. I think to start with the pilot, we would want to look at downtown to the events campus. A majority of the people would be moved between those two locations. And, you know, if the pilot was successful, expanding on to Sanford Sports Complex or the airport, there are definitely other, go back to this activity center, you know, the health systems, Sanford, Avera, the USF and Augustana, would those be more, you know? So as we would look at a pilot, defining success, and if our pilot was successful, look at other opportunities to expand this, and the airport was definitely part of those conversations.
Thank you.
Others. Councilor Kiley.
I think this has great promise in terms of making that connectivity between our events, initially, our events campus and downtown Sioux Falls. And I think Terry Ellis Schmidt would be one individual I'd be very happy to see something like this implemented, because it would make it even easier for her to attract functions to our convention center, especially when people then can very easily enjoy an afternoon lunch or the nightlife in downtown Sioux Falls. And I think your plan of seeing how that works before expanding into other areas is a good progressive approach. And I can also see that it's going to be based on the demand of what's happening out at the event center or what's happening out on the Sanford campus as well too. So it might not be where it's running on a regular basis initially.
Yep.
But I think it's got great promise. Thank you.
Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. I know this is dreaming big for now and that a lot of the details aren't solidified. And so I appreciate you having this conversation with us because there's been a lot of work that has been done to this, but it's obviously not something that's going to just flip a switch and happen tomorrow. So just a couple questions. As far as what size of bus do you envision that rapid transit to be, like holding 12 people, 24 people, 50 people? I mean, what do you see that looking like? For example, the one in Disney, I mean, you can wheel your strollers on
Yep.
there. I mean, they're awesome. They're great.
I know we definitely talked about that. I don't know that I have that in front of me right now, but I could look into it and get
That's
back to
fine.
you.
I just wasn't sure if it was more of that micro, like Ally had showed us pictures earlier, and
60-foot buses.
up to 80 passengers. Okay, that makes sense. Would there be an app linked to it so you could see when buses were coming with this technology? I love the use of technology, being forward-thinking, innovative. We're all glued to our cell phones most of the time. I mean, you're almost, if you don't have a smartphone, it's almost as if you're out of the majority, I would say.
I think that would, if we looked into the pilot a little bit further, I don't know that we accounted for that, but I would agree that we use our smartphones for everything, and to be able to, depending on what we wanted to spend on a pilot.
Right.
You know, obviously that, I don't think that $1 million included setting up some of that.
Right.
But it's definitely something that we would want to take into consideration.
Right. And I kind of see this going back to when Garth Brooks was here for 9 days. Instead of going to the fairgrounds, why didn't we go downtown?
Yep.
And shuttle people nonstop and say, hey, eat in our downtown. And then when you come back, maybe go have an appetizer and hang out and see our downtown. And it's just another way to get people downtown and use that space. And a lot of times people come from out of this city to events that if they're staying downtown, maybe they'd be more apt to stay downtown in those hotels to get to and from quickly. I think it's an exciting conversation, lots more details to come from it. But why not try it? Why not? I mean, we hear over and over and over from all these reports that walkability. Well, our event center doesn't have walkability, and that's not going to change unless we vacate a ton of streets around there, create a different whole landscape in that area. So if we can't create that, why not get people to and from? So I like the thinking of it, and I appreciate the forward thinking and being innovative and using what works in other cities.
Councilor Kiley.
Thank you. Regarding a pilot, it could be advantageous in terms of the project delivery. You'd had two scenarios, the third party as well as city acquires the assets. The advantage of going with a third party contractor is if we conduct a pilot and a third party then would obviously be providing the buses and what is necessary to conduct the pilot. And we find out that it's not something that we're interested in pursuing or expanding upon, then we don't have that investment other than the cost of conducting the pilot. And if we do find that it works out, it's possible that we could bring that third-party contractor on for a extended contract or whatever it might be, and dangle that as a carrot too in terms of getting proposals for that if they think that, well, if this is successful, there's something bigger in it for us too. So it could be a work as an advantage for us in those terms. So again, just something for you to think about. Thank you.
Other questions? If not, I do have a few comments. I'm glad to see that you showed signal preemption and possibly dedicated lanes as a discussion. I was just reading about BRT as well, and it talked about one of the keys to that was having those sorts of things so that it's not getting interrupted as much as possible, because the whole idea is it's got to be quick. Yep. It's got to be rapid. And I think it would be really important that the service frequency, of course, like you said, and I was at Disney maybe a year ago or so, and the same thing. We stayed on property, and they were cycling in and out. You could walk out the door, and you're always maybe 5 minutes away from another one. And I think it would be important to have some way in which with the phones or whatever, where you could maybe see the location. Maybe that's part of, have you written the RFP yet, or you're not quite there yet?
This is very preliminary,
Okay,
so.
we're just conceptual discussion right now.
Just a discussion.
Okay, and so I think that might be something to talk about, because people are going to want to know, when is that bus going to come? Just to be guessing, I think that would be a problem. You talked about coordination with CIP projects. Perhaps maybe the most critical to something like this is going to be Minnesota Avenue. We're talking about a huge rebuild of that, and we're dreaming about how we can do it right now. I think you're maybe in the first phases of design, maybe you're farther along, and how does it fit into that?
I don't know that, based on our study, dedicated lanes on some major streets, I don't know that, I think the signal preemption, giving the priority is going to take care of that. Some of the dedicated lanes may be in the events campus area, so they're not getting backed up in cars, but I think the preemption with the signals would really move things along, and we wouldn't be needing any dedicated lanes on Russell. There's a lot of capacity out there already. Minnesota Avenue, obviously with those improvements, we're somewhat restricted with the right-of-way width and all that, but the signals will take care of a lot of that.
Do we use signal preemption at all with SAM, with any of our equipment, or not at this point? Okay. I mean, that obviously, as we work forward with the bus service, that's something to look at. And in many cases, BRT is one piece of an entire bus system. So that'd be something that we can look at to increase their service level. While we were down in San Antonio, I did, and I know a few other, I know Councilor Started at least, rode a autonomous vehicle, and it actually did. It was meant for, basically, I don't know that it'd be so good for this, but it would be perfect for the sort of thing where if you were across the street at some of those other things like the hotel, because it could you basically could GPS in a thing, and it just kept going in circles, And so it was a neat experience. It was just an electric vehicle, and it was autonomous. So to have that demonstration, I think what would be really key, and I've thought about this too, is that we can't pick up things like the event center. It's where it's at. So how can we get people to where the economic engine is? We can get that economic impact, to get them in restaurants and all that stuff, because it can be very hard to get it out there. So I think it's going to be really important to work with downtown Sioux Falls and stakeholders, and how can we partner together, and what could you do? Maybe have a stay and play weekend, or things like that. Stay at our hotel downtown. You've got the shuttle here. We'll give you we'll give you a coupon for the whatever. You buy the tickets. It's maybe it's an all-inclusive deal that they can do. We get you tickets to the concert, plus you get a voucher for any restaurant downtown. And so I think that would be really, really key.
Yep, stakeholders are going to be a key piece of this.
And the only other comment I do have is, and I don't know, I'm not sure how you will address it, but one challenge will be, that I have heard, is that there's, I think, a lot of people that possibly come in for events. They want to come in, they want to have an easy parking and turn around and leave. And so one of the challenges, I think, is as they're coming into town is, can you get them to come off the interstate, drive past the event center, and go downtown and park, and then come back? And that's where I think it's going to be a matter, again, of probably working together to sell the experience, that it's worth going.
Incentivize it somehow.
Yep, so. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. It's very fascinating. That takes us to public comment. So anyone who would like to speak to any item that we covered today for up to 5 minutes, we would welcome you to come on up. I see a lot in the audience, so. Welcome, and if you could just state your name, that would be great. Thanks.
I'm Phyllis Ahrens. I live in the southeast part.
Welcome.
And this feels like it's echoing. Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members, for allowing us to speak today. First, I want to say I appreciate Allie's presentation. I heard her twice at the last two PTAB meetings. I do have some concerns about the presentation. First, and I'm sure that you somewhat have done this, but to look at public transportation as part of the vital infrastructure of Sioux Falls. It's like our sewer, water, streets, etc. It's not an expense to the city. It's also part of the economic engine of our community. People are using SAM to either make money or spend money. They're going to work, they're going shopping, or they're going to medical appointments. Then I also want you to consider the process for coming to this point in the discussion. If you were considering erecting a new city building or other structure, I'm certain you would engage the services of a professional in the design of that structure. Revamping the transportation system is equally important, and I would think requires input of someone who has actual expertise in public transportation services. We can all surf the internet and find lots of information, but getting someone who's actually been involved is very important. The concept of on-demand sounds great on paper. It has a real innovative ring to it. But before making decisions on this, I encourage you to check out evidence that says on-demand is not all that it's cracked up to be. And any changes that do not have the goal of increased ridership will miss an important reason for public transportation. And I did hear them actually address that now since I wrote up my notes, but initially there wasn't this thing about our purpose is to increase ridership. It was for customer experience. So I was glad to hear that change. You know, if you do decide to give on-demand a try, you know, I'd suggest maybe piloting it in addition to Saturday, or when you get beyond that, go to parts of the city that are currently not served on demand and bring those individuals to the fixed route that already exists. That would preserve it for people who don't have the cognitive abilities, and not everyone owns a smartphone or has access to a landline somewhere. An innovative thing to me would be if our fixed route system ran more frequently. We heard about, you know, every 15 minutes, you know, wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to wait 30 minutes and it just, we could count on it for that? Because one of the things, since I've got a little time left, I've been a long time advocate for people who have some limitations in their cognitive skills, and the anxiety that it will produce when, you know, I have to like remember to do this, and then I have to say, okay, I need to be there at this time. So then they're gonna, you know, all of the thinking that goes into that could push people onto paratransit because they're not going to be able to use the current system. Another thing, so they get to a business. Are business owners going to let people use their telephones to call for a ride back? A lot of things that need to go into it. I do have some handouts that talk about some of the problems with on-demand ridership, and I'll leave them. I didn't have time to make for everybody, so thank you for your time and for your interest in this. I do appreciate it a lot.
Thank you, Phyllis. We'll make sure those get distributed to everybody. Welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Brachtelsbauer, and I live on Route 5. How's that? That's a good way to describe where you live in the city, right? Except that some people in our city don't have a route that they can say that. And so one of the things that I think really needs to be important is to make sure that a pilot program is able to be expandable to the whole city, and make sure that would happen before that you approve a pilot program, to make sure it's the kind of program that would be expandable so that everybody could participate. Because I think people in our city are expecting that any change, especially a big change in our bus system, will be more available to the rest of our city. Because a lot of the city, there's a huge swath of it that doesn't have access now, and I think people will be expecting that. And so that's one of the problems with on-demand. It works better like in a smaller area or out to a certain area that's not served now. So that's a concern that I hope you will keep in mind. One thing I want to say is that I don't think there's anybody who wants to say, let's keep doing what we're doing. I think everybody wants something better. And I think I agree with Phyllis that there are experts on transit planning who know how to beef up a transit system to make it modern, efficient, more frequent, more accessible to more of the city, and more efficient financially as well as time-wise. but yet with the fixed routes. And that it turns out that fixed routes have more capability of the increased kind of ridership that's increased enough to actually make a difference for the climate crisis that we're in, to have more people switching car rides to bus rides. And I think that's something that hasn't really been looked at, and I'm very disappointed that it hasn't. And one of the concerns that we've had in this whole process this past year is, I know myself, I've kept asking the core team for an example of a comparable city with a successful program like is being proposed here. And every time an example has been put forward, I personally have checked into these and have found nothing comparable to our city. Belleville was the big example at the month or so, about a month, the October PTAB. And Belleville's system was just a night bus to help people get home from work or home from their evening activity, which is a great use for an on-demand thing, because that's, you know, not something that you maybe need the fixed routes for. So that was not comparable to us. Arlington, Texas was one mentioned at the July meeting. That's a city double our size, and that they're only up to, I checked with the person last week down there, 20,000 rides a month, which is nothing comparable to what we have in Sioux Falls already, with even the limited routes that we have here. Nothing comparable, even for a city twice this size. She mentioned at one meeting at the PTAB in October, Newton, Massachusetts. It's entirely different. They have like 70 bus routes in this huge area, metropolitan area, even though the town itself is a small one. I mean, it's nothing comparable. They're not switching their huge system to on-demand. They've mentioned Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Boulder, Colorado. Those are entirely different systems and much more comprehensive, and already servicing so many people and not switching to on-demand, even though they use some on-demand to reach areas or senior citizens. Sometimes you have to call a day ahead, that kind of thing. And sometimes it's reaching areas out in the county. And so it's entirely different from what's being proposed here. So we're still looking for a comparable, and I will look at the ones that she mentioned today, because we hadn't heard those before. But I think you would want to know that this is successful somewhere if you're going to put some time and money into it and revamp a system, because we really do want something that'll work to have more people able to ride. Public transportation is so important for our environment and for our economy and for the lifeblood of the city. People getting around is so critical. So I'll reiterate also one more thing, that if we're going to do something comparable, we need to put marketing funds into fixed route system. We haven't really done much marketing and promotion, and that was mentioned for others. So I think that's important, that we should do some of that too. So far, we haven't really done that. So I'd appreciate your attention to that. Thank you. Thank you for waiting for these long meetings.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kathy. Welcome.
Hello, I'm Melanie Bliss, and I don't have prepared comments tonight. And there's a reason for that. I live on Route 5, and I am the mayor of the corner of 29th and 1st. And if we had the northwest corner of every crossroads in town and had the person in that house, they would be a wonderful focus group for you. And tonight, I see 3 things on the agenda that I think are really interrelated. And I came with one idea, and the other 2 just bombarded me. And I didn't know this assistant city engineer, but I see that they're all totally connected. And let's not have 3 separate studies, but have the council order that all these people work together and come up with the best idea. We're all trying to get people places, and it feels very disjointed as I'm sitting out here. And it seems like we've got a lot of talent, but they're not talking to each other. They're like 3 canals in Venice that don't connect. And so why couldn't we just have the Venetian Sea and look at things a little bit differently? You don't serve the southern part of the city. We're usually talking about there aren't polling places in the northern part of the city, but you don't have bus routes in the southern part of the city, and you don't have them to large medical facilities. You don't have any to the residential areas, and you gotta build ridership. And you can't only be depending on people that live in the poorer sections of the city that don't have cars to bring you ridership when the fee will be $3 per ride because they don't have the money. So you need to be looking at all of these things, and it seems to me that they really connect. The other important thing is every town you go to, the buses are just constantly coming. Could be a 15-minute interval, but they're always coming. And who wants to take so much more time to get from place to place? We want to get there quickly, and everything of tonight, we want to move people quickly. That's right. So you get it together and you order it to be done, and the magic genie will come and we'll all ride buses. The other thing is people that go to conventions depend on these shuttle buses to get places. And if you don't serve the airport, look at the number. You know when the airplanes leave, you know when they come in. It's a simple thing. I ride buses from airports to hotels. You're trying to run a transit system to hotels. Well, people are coming in for the conferences and conventions, and they need a ride. Okay? Now, several of us have been working several days with people who do not speak English in Sioux Falls. They do not have access to buses, and they depend on the most dilapidated cars to get places. And if we had good bus routes in also places going to work, I think that would be good. That's a scattered discussion tonight, but it has been a scattered discussion, which I think coincidentally all wound up in one meeting, and I'm glad to have come to that one meeting. But you need to make progress and working together. Thank you.
Great comments. Thank you. Others? Seeing none, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you.